Happy St. Patrick's Day, folks, and welcome back to #AskGSM, the weekly Monday mailbag video where I answer your questions from Facebook and Twitter right here in this video form. Of course, I am wearing my St. Patrick's Day colors today, right here on the 17th, the best day of the month. I am on spring break at the moment, hence why the lack of scenery, the different environment that I am in my usual videos. But nonetheless, we are here on the 17th to present to you the 18th edition of #AskGSM. A lot of great questions this week. Let's dive right into them. First questions come from Facebook. Zach D asks, do you think Cena's had better matches on Raw in his career than on pay-per-view? Also, what do you think his best pay-per-view match and his best Raw match are in his career? Well, that's a very good question in terms of whether he's had better matches on Raw than on pay-per-view. Some of his best matches were on pay-per-view with CM Punk back in 2011, his match with Edge, Unforgiven 2006, the TLC matchup. All great matches. But I would argue that some of his better matches are on Raw because he's also had a lot of kick-ass matches with CM Punk on Raw as well. He's had that great match with Cesaro a few weeks ago. The match with Randy Orton was better. The match with Randy Orton a few weeks after the Rumble was better than the Rumble match itself, the match that they had at the Royal Rumble pay-per-view. So yeah, I would certainly argue that a lot of his matches on Raw are better than those than on the pay-per-view, which is, it should be the other way around. But regardless, I definitely agree with that sentiment. His best pay-per-view match and his best Raw match. Best Raw match, I would definitely have to go with versus Shawn Michaels in 2007. Either that or versus CM Punk from February of 2013, just last year. That was in a tremendous matchup. But the Shawn Michaels one, the Shawn Michaels one went about an hour in England, which they were hot all the match for the entire match. So I would have to say for Shawn Michaels, Michaels versus John Cena versus from April 2007. Best pay-per-view match, I might be a bit biased here in saying this because it's my favorite match of all time, but John Cena versus CM Punk from the 2011 Money in the Bank pay-per-view, the environment, the story leading up to it, the execution, the aftermath, everything about it was just so well done that I would have to go with versus CM Punk in Chicago at the 2011 Money in the Bank pay-per-view for the WWE Championship. Victor T asks, do you think the reasons to hate John Cena outweigh the reasons to like him? Now, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about the character or the person? Because the person, I think, I like the person, I don't like the character. The person himself, very respectable, does all the charities, blah, 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 blah. I've said this a million times before. Huge fan of the person, he inspires me, very motivational. The character itself, very stale. It's not terrible. John Cena, the character, is not the worst thing in the world, but it's very stale. He's been doing the same thing for about a decade now. So I don't think, in terms of his character, I don't think the good reasons outweigh the bad reasons. This is only my opinion. It's very subjective. So I wouldn't say so because he's very stale. He's a very good in-ring worker. Let's take nothing away from that. Just the stuff that he's been involved in for the last decade now, he's been very stale. Going back to last week on Raw when he was doing comedy in his promos with Bray Wyatt. I mean, he's still doing that in 2014. I mean, come on, really? So I don't know, it's kind of hard to say, but if we're talking about the character, the bad reasons do outweigh the good reasons. If we're talking about the person, then not at all. Next question comes from Jared J. from Facebook. Given the choice, which WWE tag team would you choose to compete on The Amazing Race, past and present? Now, I had no idea what The Amazing Race was until you mentioned it, so I looked it up on Google. Apparently, for those of you that don't know, it's a reality show where they get a pair of people to go race around the world that have some sort of pre-existing relationship with one another. So past tag team, I mean, there's millions of tag teams that you could probably choose. I just went with the Hardys because they're brothers. They know each other very well. They could obviously thrive in that kind of environment. They're a quick tag team. So I would go with the Hardys. As far as present tag teams, kind of same reason for the Usos. They're brothers, they're siblings. They know each other inside and out. Very quick tag team. They could probably succeed in that kind of environment. So I would have to go with the Usos and the Hardys. His second question was, since this video will air on his birthday, what were your thoughts on the late Test? Now, I obviously wasn't around to see Test in his prime. I started watching wrestling in 2008. But I have gone back and watched some of his matches through the WWE Network. I watched his match with Eddie Guerrero from WrestleMania 17 just a few weeks ago. He's very agile, very talented for a big performer. I think he was very underrated as a performer. I know they pushed him quite a few times in the early 2000s and his feud with Triple H and Stephanie McMahon and all that stuff. And I don't really think he got the credit he deserved for that feud. He probably should have been pushed more because I know he wasn't doing much at the end of his career when he was on ECW. So I think he should have been pushed more. He was very agile, great performer, and just an amazing theme, by the way, too. Test. This is a test. 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 This is a test. I love that theme. Cody C asks, what do you think? What do you think Edge's best match was before he was forced to retire in 2011? Like I said, started watching in 08. I have seen some of his matches. I've seen a lot of his matches from the early years. But so it's kind of hard to say because I started watching later than a lot of people have at the end of Edge's career. But obviously the TLC matches were some of the best in his career versus John Cena, Unforgiven 06. Personally, I would have to say if it's not the TLC matches at WrestleMania and SummerSlam, I would have to go with his matches with The Undertaker. I thought that was a tremendous feud. It lasted almost all of 2008. One of my favorite feuds as a wrestling fan. His match with Taker at WrestleMania 24, at One Night Stand 2008, and the TLC match for the World Heavyweight Championship, their Hell in a Cell match. So any of those matches, probably the WrestleMania one. I love the One Night Stand and the Hell in a Cell ones from SummerSlam. So any of those would probably work for me as his best matches that he was forced to retire. Other people would probably say otherwise, but those are my favorite matches of Edge's before he was forced to retire in 2011. And the matches with Jericho too were also great from 2010. Paul S. asked, any chance that Seth Rollins will be given a huge push? He has the mic and in-ring skills too, like Punk. Very funny that you mentioned he's like Punk in the sense that a couple years ago, when Seth Rollins first debuted on NXT, the revamping of NXT, I never watched him as Tyler Black in ROH or whatever. I was just first exposed to him as Seth Rollins in WWE on NXT, and the first comparison I made was between him and CM Punk. The early version of CM Punk, when he first got his career going in ECW, the long hair, the style, the in-ring style, the mic skills, all that kind of stuff. Punk is obviously much better on the mic than Rollins is, but Rollins in the last few months or so has really stepped up his game on the mic, so I think he could really make it far in WWE. He's been kind of positioned as the leader of the Shield in the last week or two, as opposed to Ambrose or Reigns, so I love that, and he's kind of the central focus right now of the Shield, so I really like that. I do think he's very capable of getting a huge push in WWE. He's very deserving of it once the Shield eventually breaks up for good. Like Reigns and Ambrose, I don't think he will be forgotten. He's definitely been spotlighted the last few weeks in the breakup of the Shield, so I think he will be getting a huge push. Not a huge push, not like World Heavyweight Champion next month push, but I think he will be getting a very good push once the Shield eventually breaks up. Nathan D. asks, if Vampiro got kept on from the WCW TakeOver, what position on the card would he be at in WWE? Not very familiar with Vampiro. I am somewhat familiar with some of his work, but I honestly can't really tell you. I think he could have probably been a very good mid-carder. WWE, they abused most of the talents from WCW after the TakeOver in 01, 02, the invasion angle. So I would bet, I would put my money on that WWE would not have used him wisely. He probably just would have been another mid-carder in WWE, unfortunately, or even below that. So he probably would not have made it far in WWE despite being a very talented individual. Because the only reason I say that is because WWE abused most of the talents that came over from WCW after the invasion angle in 01. And now time for the Twitter questions. At Jeremy8911 asks, do you think they should have Sami Zayn debut in the Battle Royal at WrestleMania? Very good idea, like they did Alexander Rusev in the Royal Rumble this year, Bo Dallas the year before. The only reason I would say no to that, as much as I love Sami Zayn, it's a 30-man Battle Royal. Obviously, he wouldn't win. That's a given. I have that on the Big Show, unfortunately. But I think he would just be overshadowed. Unless he was able to eliminate a few people, I don't think he should be eliminated. So if he's not going to win, then I don't think there's really any point. I think it'd be cool, but I just think it'd be a waste of time. If Cesaro won't be in it, and I don't think he should be, he very well might be, but I don't think he will be. That'd be cool if they had a clash in the ring at WrestleMania. That'd be amazing. But other than that, I would have to go to a thumbs down for that answer, only because I think it'd be overshadowed. So, at SakiAndy _ asks, what do you think about Zack Ryder's new show, Last Resort, and do you think it'll be as successful as The True Long Island Story? I almost botched that for a second. I love The True Long Island Story. I love that so much. I was sad the day it ended. I'm very happy he's bringing a new show back called The Last Resort. He has nothing to lose, so I'm very happy that he is doing this show, because like he said in the video, he has nothing left to lose. He's at the bottom of the card. He has no freaking merchandise. They're not pushing him. They're not even putting him on TV. So what's the point at this point? So I like the idea of a new show for Zack Ryder. Will it be as successful as the True Long Island Story? Probably not, because that's it's hard for lightning to strike twice, especially with something like this. I commend him if he does. If he is able to make it succeed, I'm all the power to him. But as a fan of Zack Ryder, even I can say that this might not be as successful. But I commend him for going all out and doing something fresh and new, as opposed to just wasting his time away on the card and waiting for himself to be released. So I don't think it will be as successful. It very well might be. There's a good possibility that it might be. I just don't think it will be. But I like the idea of the new show, though. At DAJOSC11 asks, what was your very first Raw, SmackDown, or pay-per-view you remember watching, and how were you first introduced to wrestling? Everyone knows the story, pretty much everybody knows the story of how I first started watching wrestling with the match between Orton and Regal from April 2008 on Monday Night Raw in England, but that wasn't the first Raw that I ever watched. The first Raw that I remember watching was in September of 2007. It was the night when Hornswoggle was revealed to be the illegitimate son of Vince McMahon. So I remember watching that. I don't remember anything else about that show except for that one closing angle, which is probably the worst thing to start with as a wrestling fan. But I watched a few Raws after that, kind of stopped watching. I wasn't really a fan at that point. I really got into it back in April 2008 with Regal and Orton, all that good stuff. I'll probably make a video on that, a separate video on that in a couple months or next month when the anniversary comes around. The anniversary. For SmackDown, I remember watching, it was probably in May of 2008, right after I started watching on a regular basis, when Edge was crowned the new World Heavyweight Champion. First pay-per-view I remember watching, I remember keeping up with the pay-per-views. I never watched a pay-per-view live back in 08 or 09. The first pay-per-view I really watched, I think, was Money in the Bank 2010 online or something. I didn't buy it, of course. But how was I first introduced to wrestling? I was just a huge fan of the USA Network at the time, back in 08. Thought I would give it a shot by getting into Raw, which was also on the USA Network and still is, of course. So I thought I'd give it a shot and ended up being just completely blown away by it, and I've been a huge die-hard wrestling fan ever since. And the final question comes from Jared F. Ferrans. His question was, do you think we will see John Morrison on a national syndicated wrestling program again? I would like to think so. I'm not the biggest fan of John Morrison. It's not like I hate him or anything, but he just wasn't one of my favorites. But I have good reason to believe that he will be back in WWE at some point in the very near future. He left in late 2011. One of the biggest reasons why people thought it would be a good thing that he left was for him to improve his mic skills. So hopefully he did that in his time off. He comes back better than ever. Will he be pushed? I'm not too sure about that. I wouldn't put my money on him getting pushed to world title contender worthy status, but I do see him coming back at some point to WWE. For the longest time, I thought he would go to TNA. It wasn't the case. He very might still go to TNA, but I thought he would have gone to TNA years ago when he first left WWE, but that was not the case. So yeah, I think we would see him back. We might see him back, or will see him back in the United States on WWE television sooner rather than later. So that does it this week, folks, for this week's hashtag AskGSM video. If you want to send in a question, make sure to like my official Facebook page at GrahamGSM Matthews. Drop a comment on the wall. Tweet me on Twitter with the hashtag AskGSM on Twitter at WrestleRant. And of course, make sure to subscribe, like the video, drop a comment. If you want to do that as well, you can drop a comment with your question. I'll include it in next week's video. So once again, thanks for watching, guys. Enjoy your St. Patrick's Day, and this is GSM signing out. Till next week, guys.